Hello and welcome to the IT Pros How-To Guide to Building a Strong Security Culture. Today's webinar is sponsored by KnowBe4 and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech, and I am excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we have a few housekeeping items that are going to help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. While we won't have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation, we will pass along your questions to the KnowBe4 team for follow-up after the event. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, and slide advancement issues. But if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to a link to getting started with KnowBe4. There are also some links labeled ATM, which stands for Actual Tech Media. One of those is the ATM Decisions Group, which is a panel of IT decision makers that you can apply to join to participate in some more in-depth events and other opportunities. Also, there's a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of more upcoming events like this one. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the link with the details there. And with that housekeeping out of the way, let's get to today's fantastic session. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, Erich Kron, Security Awareness Advocate at KnowBe4. Now, Eric's got an action-packed, information-packed session here to give you. So I'm going to turn things over to Erich. Erich, take it away.
Hey everybody, Erich Kron here, and today we're going to talk a little bit about building a strong security culture. Now, security culture is one of those things that it's becoming more and more popular these days as we progress from just kind of being aware of things, right? Like the human side has got to progress a little bit. And we use, it's called the ABC principle, which is awareness, behavior, and culture. And we're going to talk a little bit about this today and how this progresses, how this turns into culture, and how we're maturing our processes as we move ahead here, and frankly, making bigger impacts within organizations. So let's get started here. A little bit about me. I've actually been a IT person. I've been in the trenches, a practitioner for, I hate to say it, since back in like 1995-ish, 94. Oh, it had to be before that, actually. I was on frontline support at Microsoft for Windows 95. So it has been a while, if you can imagine. But I've been through lots of different things. I've seen lots of different changes happen in our approaches and maturing of cybersecurity throughout the years. And at heart, I'm kind of a geek, right? I work with single board computers. I build my own IoT sensors, things like that. Like I am a technical geek. However, what I realized in my cybersecurity career is that we can't just rely on technology, right? There is that human piece that we do have to tackle. And frankly, it's not something that a lot of the people that are drawn to cybersecurity or IT, that's not necessarily what they love to do. And so it can be a little daunting sometimes. And that's why we wanted to come up with this book and this webinar here to help you understand so that it's a little bit more comfortable to do and we understand kind of what our real goals are. So that's my background. I work with KnowBe4 here. 60,000, I think 65,000 plus customers at this point. Been here about 8 years now, which is crazy. But I've seen it grow. I've seen it change. I've seen us again mature in this side. And this has been a pretty amazing ride, to be honest with you. So, what we're going to cover today, fairly simple. What is culture? A culture focused program, because a lot of times that's not what we're building. We're building just awareness focused. And then how we build the culture with that. So, let's start with the big one. What is culture? And the reason I want to start this simply is, in my experience, when we go places and I ask people, "Hey, what do you think of as culture?" I've heard a lot of very different things, and in my mind, for years, what I thought of when I heard the word culture is what people do when nobody's looking. Maybe that makes sense to you, right? Like when you're not being supervised, what is your natural thing to do? How do you act naturally, even if you know you're not being supervised? And that's kind of what went through my head. But there's a couple of different things related to culture. And one thing we do have to understand right off the bat is there is a security culture in every organization. You have a security culture whether you like it or not. Unfortunately, it can be a bad culture. So the real question is, how strong, intentional, and sustainable is your security culture? And what do you need to do about it? Now, something that was brought to my attention not too many years ago when we were talking about this is I always said, you have a strong culture. You have a strong culture. But there's a different part of that here. You can have a strong bad culture, and I think part of our definition needs to be that we're working for a strong good security culture, because depending on your organization, like we've all seen or heard of organizations that just disregard everything, that cut corners on everything, that doesn't really worry about stuff. We've all seen those kinds of organizations. They generally don't last too terribly long, but we've seen it happen. So we got to understand that we're looking for a good and strong culture, and it's got to be intentional and sustainable. So the definition of culture, organizational culture, is not the sum of roles, processes, and measurements. It's the sum of subconscious human behaviors that people repeat based on prior successes and collectively held beliefs. I know that sounds kind of crazy, right? That it's kind of a long drawn out one, but if we think through it a little bit, it's not like the processes and measurements. That's not what culture is. It's what we do again when nobody is looking. The sum of subconscious human behaviors that we repeat, and we repeat these behaviors based on previous successes, right? We generally don't repeat behaviors that didn't work out well. We generally try to make successful choices, especially in repeatable stuff, and collectively held beliefs, right? So this is kind of a core thing for us. Now, security culture is not just related to awareness and training. It's the sum of subconscious human behaviors that people repeat based on prior experiences and collectively held beliefs. Does that sound very familiar? Well, it should be. But it's not just related to awareness and training. It's the behaviors. And that's the big thing. Remember ABC: awareness, behavior, culture. There's a big difference. Now, within every organizational culture, which is kind of the big one there, right? The organizational cultures are kind of like how you feel when you walk in the door. Here at Know Before, I got to tell you, it's a really cool culture. It's open door policies. I mean, our dress code is literally, if you don't get arrested on the way to work, you're good to go. Like, that is our culture. It's very much about taking care of customers. It's very much about that side of things, as opposed to just being a business out for money. Now, when we talk about the security culture, it's generally a part of that organizational culture. And oftentimes they're going to somewhat parallel each other. In other words, if you have a good, strong organizational culture, more often than not, unless somebody hasn't put any effort into it, that's going to be reflected in your security culture because as an overall culture, you care. So I know kind of a deep thought here, but we want to get started on this in a way that makes sense to us. This is a pretty daunting subject. And if we don't get the basic definition down, it's really hard to build upon that. Okay. Now, culture is shared, learned, it's adaptive. Yes, it changes. It's prescriptive too. Yeah, there are policies and things like that involved. There are rules, patterns, assumptions, beliefs. There are those sorts of things involved, but that's not the primary driver of this. But it is interesting to see it shared and learned. It's an interesting thing to watch organizations with a strong and good culture. I'm going to use us as an example again and know before. You have the people that come in, they just get started in the organization. And when you're new in an organization, whether you realize it or not, you're kind of looking around subconsciously, seeing what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. This is all just part of our human psyche. And to watch people come in and then rather quickly move into the organizational culture that we have, which is fun, which is open, which is very much an open book and transparent type culture here. That's a very, very powerful thing. What happens is building a culture is not the easiest thing to do if nobody's ever worked at it before. Okay, so if you have nothing to work on, yeah, it can be a little bit daunting. No doubt about it. But what happens is, as the culture is established, as the patterns and behaviors and habits are created, it becomes easier to maintain. And when you grow, it's not nearly the effort it took to get you there in the very first place. It is an important thing that we need to do. It is something that we absolutely need to spend the time and effort doing, no doubt about it. Now, a lot of this is driven from the top. Our leaders are our cultural beacons. In other words, we take a lot of clues and cues from people's behavior as opposed to their words. Now, words are definitely a thing, but if you have somebody, for example, a leader that says, it's important that you lock your computer when you walk away, and they never lock their computer when they walk away, you get that in your head. You understand that they don't really take that very seriously. So it's important that they're sending the right signals. And for many places, this is one of the tougher parts, is getting the leadership to demonstrate what they're saying. But if you can get this to happen, it's going to be huge. But yeah, the leaders are the cultural beacons. They lead lots of different ways, explicitly, implicitly, symbolically, representationally, and constantly. It's these things that kind of work together there. You see in the bubbles. It's what you believe in, how you behave, and what people think you believe in. And those are actually different parts of trust and integrity. So when you have leaders that say one thing and do another, obviously looking at the how you behave is a problem. And people will make assumptions that you don't really believe in what's going on. So you want to make sure that as you go through this, don't neglect the leadership when it comes to making sure they understand the importance of a good, strong security culture. So let's talk a little bit about a culture-focused program here. Some of the secrets to a higher impact program. Well, we're going to go through these a little bit deeper. It's important that we spend a little bit of time on this, okay? But we're going to take stock of where you are, where you're going, view it through the lens of the organizational culture. Now, first of all, let's start with this one. Take stock of where you are and where you're going. This is something that I found works for me throughout my career and different things that I do. This is a very important thing. For example, even in the security awareness training side of things, I always say do the benchmark. Like, this is why we do a baseline, is so you know where you're starting from and you know if what you're doing is making any difference whatsoever. So it can be frustrating if you go, well, I did all of this stuff, and someone says, well, did it work? And you have no answer for that. So you want to do that, and not just because of answering other people, but to know if you need to make changes, if you need to tweak some things, perhaps, if you need to move some stuff around a little bit to get better results. So you want to know where you're at. Look at your surroundings, okay? Talk to other leaders and employees to kind of feel where everybody is. Surveys are not a bad thing for this, although I'm not a huge fan of too many surveys. You can do surveys to try to get an idea of what's going on here. You want to outline your goals for the year too. So this is where you step back and you do a little bit of strategic planning. We do have a security culture survey that you can use here, and it's not a bad time to do that. What we don't want to do is overrun people with it, but it certainly can help you figure out, okay, this is kind of where I'm at. And what's interesting is once you get these survey results and you measure these things, you'll notice that sometimes different parts of it are going to move at the same time. So you may be focused on one piece and another piece also improves. That's not uncommon. But always, 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 it's a good idea to know where you're at before you start making some changes, okay? So you also want to consider where the awareness piece fits in with each element of the cybersecurity framework, right? Detect, identify, protect, respond, recover. You want to work that into how it fits in within your specific organization. So secret number 2, view awareness through the lens of organizational culture. Remember what I said, it's driven from the top, although anyone can impact it. All right. And like you see here, some organizations are more formal than others. All right. For example, a 100-year-old law firm is probably going to have a different culture than a Silicon Valley startup. You need to take that in account when you're talking about this, when you're looking at the organizational culture, and you can modify and tweak your training and education pieces to go with that. For example, this 100-year-old law firm may be a little bit more traditional, like on the left picture there, wood bookshelves and stuff like that. Well, it probably wouldn't fit real well to use some trendy humor-based sorts of education in this, okay? That may not resonate with the people in there because that just would clash with the culture. On the other hand, with the Silicon Valley type startup, like what you see on the right there, that kind of a thing, you may not want to do the ultra formal type training with that. This is what we want to look at when we're talking about this, when we're talking about how we're going to change their behaviors. We want to look at the entire organizational culture and try to match in with that as much as we can when it comes to the training piece, so it doesn't just stand out like a sore thumb. So secret number 3, leverage behavior management principles to help shape good security hygiene. I like this, and this is an important lesson to learn. Remember, we're talking about awareness, behavior, and culture, the ABCs. Security awareness and behavior are not the same thing. Just because you make someone aware of something, it just doesn't mean that they have to care about it. So it's important to make relevance matter. People need to see how this impacts them and what they have, what skin they have in the game. It's not just about the organization. It's not just about making someone aware. And I use this is a really cheesy example. I get it, right? But I think it kind of drives a point home. I'll say, if I tell you that there's a blue car in the parking lot you go, yeah, okay, that's nice. That's wonderful. You're aware of it. If I say there's a blue car in the parking lot and your name is spray painted across the side of it, all of a sudden you care, right? This is relevant to you. And now you want to know what's going on with that. It's the same sort of thing. And I talk about this in some of my other educational talks that I do when we're talking about the right way to train people. But maybe we step back a little bit and take the corporate focus off of this and do a little bit more on the personal focus. In other words, how they can protect themselves from scammers online and things like that. And as they learn these different tools, as they learn these different techniques and ways to spot these, it's going to help at work as well. But you might tweak that a little bit so it's not just all about the office. That's an important thing that I think a lot of people miss when they're trying to modify behavior. Now, it's important that your awareness program should not focus only on information delivery, because you want to ask yourself, do you care more about what your people know or what they do? And that's another way to frame it. That's the awareness versus the behavior. If people know that having a weak password that's reused in 35 different platforms is bad, but they still do it, that's a problem, right? You care more about the fact that they don't do that when they discover it, when they find out, and when it makes sense to them and they can see where they have something at risk. So ask yourself that over and over again. I love this. I actually really like this slide. And I would almost say, print this slide out, put it up in your office or your cube. Do you care more about what people know or what they do? Now, this is another thing that I see where people tend to make errors. You can't effectively train on everything. Now, this is something I see when people, they come in and they want to make these changes, they get the approval and everybody's on board. And that's a great, great thing. But we have to be careful that we don't go too far. And again, this comes back to looking at your current organizational culture when it comes to how you're going to handle this. All right. If you want to change behavior, focus on 2 to 3 behaviors at a time and give it time to get those changes done. In other words, you don't go, hey, for next month, we're going to focus on people not reusing passwords. You do it for a month and then you walk away and you move on to something else, right? You really have to give this time and you have to kind of inundate people with the message and the idea. If you want to change behavior, focus on just a couple at a time. And that's where the measuring comes in as well. You want to see if what you're doing is mattering. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people come in and they just want to, like I said, kind of kick the door down and make all these changes at once. And sometimes that upsets the employees. Nobody likes change, let's be honest, right? So if somebody comes in and they just want to change everything, that can be a real problem for people. It can be very disorienting. It can be something that really bothers people. So again, be careful with that. Now, there are times where you might be able to come in and make some big sweeping changes. For example, an organization that's been hit by ransomware and has been, fighting to get the doors back open. That is a time where you can generally come in and you can make some big changes that are going to impact everybody because they've already been impacted by it. And they go, okay, I realize this, and they're willing to accept it. But if everything's running along the way it has for the last year or two and you try to make big changes, you might find some uphill battles there. There's also some tips and tricks that you can use when it comes to how you implement some of these behavior changes. So nudges are a big thing. And I really like the nudge thing here. Instead of just saying, you're going to do this, you might be able to make it a little bit easier on yourself by using some nudge theory. And I like this with the trash and recycle here. And I always try to imagine I'm standing there with, a soda bottle. There's nothing stopping me from throwing it in the landfill side versus the recycle. But if you look at it, some of the psychology here on the left hand side, you see that garbage truck and it's just trash and it looks dirty and nasty. On the right side, it's beautiful and clean. And we all know that's what the inside of the recycle bin looks like, right? But it's beautiful and it's clean. It makes you feel better about contributing to the recycle than that nasty landfill stuff on the left. This is a nudge theory thing. Nobody's telling you you have to do it. They're letting you make that choice on your own, but they're giving you some direction in which way would probably be a good way to do it. Some of the other things that I've seen them do or that we've talked about in the past about this is, for example, in a cafeteria for like an office or something like that, right? Where people go to buy lunch and stuff at work. The idea is that you place the healthier foods at eye level, things like apples, bananas, fruit, veggies, the healthier stuff at eye level. But the junk food, you don't take it away. You don't say you can't have that, but you put it down a little lower where it's a little less convenient. And the people, that what they're seeing when they look over is they're seeing these healthier foods as opposed to seeing the junk food. This is another way to do a nudge. But again, just saying, no, you can't do this at all, well, that's probably not going to be nearly as well taken. You want it to kind of germinate in their mind and almost make it their idea, if at all possible. So, secret 4, be realistic. You really need to understand what's achievable in the short term and be optimistic about the long-term payoff. I'm going to tell you right now, you are probably going to reach some points where it gets a little frustrating, where you don't feel like you're making progress. But again, we're changing behavior here, and that can take quite a bit of time to do. So you got to stick with it. You got to kind of work with it. Be consistent with everything. If you're putting out a message saying bad passwords are bad, man, continue doing it. Put it in your email, in your signature block. Try to get it into morning meeting type stuff or whatever that you may have that goes out to everybody. Have that in front of them all the time. Some of the more clever things I've seen people do, it's kind of funny, but you take some of these slogans or whatever it is that you're using to kind of work with this behavior and putting it on the inside of the bathroom stall, right? So you almost have a captive audience right there. And whether we think that we retain that or not, the psychological side of being exposed to it over and over and over again is a pretty strong one. So it's consistency and a commitment to persevere. In other words, sometimes you're going to feel frustrated. You may want to step back and go, okay, am I doing this right or not? Or you may just go, you know what? This is a tough thing to get people to change. Let's go ahead and let's keep going this way and remain consistent and see how it's going to go in a week or two or something along those lines. You also do need to know your place and scope of influence. In other words, if you're not in leadership where the culture is driven, then you need to understand that you personally may not have the impact that you would like to have going forward. So that's when you work on the leadership. That's when you talk to them. You may not have the kind of influence. Now, in some organizations, in some smaller organizations, I've seen it where the IT or security person is well liked. They're part of the workforce in a way that in some of them we tend to be a little bit more on the introverted side. But I've seen some that are very well liked, and they can actually do a lot of influencing. But don't forget, your leadership is one of the key things that you want to do. Get it from the top and understand that your ability to influence this stuff may not be huge right now. That's why you pick a couple of people, influence them, and then let them influence larger numbers. It's kind of like a snowball effect. So let's talk about building culture. All right, we're going to go through some steps here. These are actually from the Security Culture How-To Guide, which frankly I think is an absolutely fantastic guide, possibly because I had part of something to do with writing it. But I can't tell you how many times I've been at talks and I've talked to folks about stuff, and as I'm introducing the idea of culture and things like that to them, afterwards I get this line of people and they're like, okay, so what is the step I do? What is step number one to do this? Because a lot of us are very analytical thinkers. We think about things in a very tactical way, which is step one, then step two, then step three. I want to have a recipe for this. Okay. And it's not always easy to put that together, but I thought, if we put this together, let's work with the 7 steps that are going to get you going in the right direction. Okay. I really do think it's a great publication. What we're going to talk about here is part of that. Now, we will discuss, or we're going to mention actually the 7 dimensions of security culture. This is a little bit deeper dive. This was written by Culture, which is it was subsidiary of here at KnowBe4. Incredible research group, very, very smart people. And this is what they focused on for a long time. So the 7 dimensions of security culture is a downloadable white paper from us as well. And they talk about how to use this to measure a security culture. It's important to be able to put these things together as you change it, so you can do that measurement piece. Again, not going into detail on these things, but they may be referenced in some of these slides that are coming up. So the 7 steps we're going to talk about here for creating a security culture. Step 1, choose 1 or 2 behaviors you want to change. Design a plan to influence behaviors at an organizational scale. Get that leadership buy-in. Communicate, execute the plan, measure results, and determine the move forward strategy. So we're going to break these down in a little bit more manageable size pieces here in the next probably half hour or so. So step 1, choosing 1 or 2 behaviors you would like to change. That is sometimes tougher than you might think. Now, again, one of the things that I see people mess up is trying to change way, way, way too much at the same time. And those big changes are going to be, eventually people are going to push back on all those big changes. Okay. Now, it's important that the behaviors you choose are going to align with the top organizational risk. In other words, we want to look at the risk that the organization has, because we are talking security culture here. We want to look at that risk and we want to say, okay, how does this impact us? Now, for example, manufacturing, if the manufacturing line goes down, that is a huge problem for the organization, right? The risk of having a line go down can be one of the most catastrophic things to impact these organizations. I mean, if you think about manufacturing, we saw, I believe that was last year, when Clorox got hit by ransomware. And what it did is it stopped production enough that they were expecting a 23 to 20, I think it was 23 to 26% impact to first quarter earnings, because simply they didn't have product to sell. So that's a big problem for manufacturing. For a medical organization, it may actually revolve more around regulations and HIPAA sorts of things, violations that can be very, very expensive to the organization. So keep that in mind. The behaviors you choose should align with the top organizational risk. The security culture survey may help you identify which behaviors to focus on. I do love that survey. I said I don't love surveys, but this is a good one to run on occasion because it gives you an idea of where you may be lacking. Now, sometimes the places that you're low are not going to be ones that align with your top organizational risk, but it's a good idea to see where you are. So give that ample time for change. And what I like to do in situations like this is to run some cycles. In other words, you set a time frame. You go, okay, in 60 days, I would like to improve this part of the survey by X amount, 20%, 30%, 100%. I don't know. Whatever is reasonable, though, okay? And you may not know what reasonable is until you run through a first cycle. Make the cycles long enough that they have a chance to do some change, but short enough that you're able to, once you've made that change and you establish that better behavior and habits, that you're not just wasting time on the same thing there. 30 to 60 days may be a good start for that. So once they run through a cycle or two and you see what's going on, boy, if they're changing really, really fast and they're really jumping into this and taking it off, you might be able to adjust the cadence. You might be able to make it happen more often, or instead of one or two things, you may be able to go with 3 or 4 different things. It really depends on how that comes in. But unless you're measuring it, you may not know. So choose 1 or 2 behaviors you want to change and stick with those at least at first. Now, step 2, design a plan to influence behaviors on an organizational scale. So behaviors can be directly influenced through formal means like policy or change, or can be done informally and socially, especially through demonstration by leadership. For example, a leader that locks their computer every time they walk away from it demonstrates how important it is to others, even if they don't realize it. Like, again, there's some psychology here that happens subconsciously sometimes, where we see this being demonstrated over and over again, and we go, okay, that's cool. Now imagine the trickle down. Somebody sees this going on, that their boss, every time they walk away, they lock their computer. They go, okay, this is really important. So they lock their computer when they walk away. The next thing you know, everybody's locking their computer when they go away. Well, now you have a new employee that comes in, sits down on day 1. They're looking around and they start noticing that every time somebody walks away, they lock their computer. Boom. They're already being influenced by those habits that were created. And that's what I'm saying, is it's so much easier once this is in place and once the ball is rolling to maintain these good habits. So identify people that can help influence these, even if they're not in your own department, and you use them as champions. Okay, there's some interesting things that go on, and this happens with security awareness training, and in this case as well. Here's the thing, we're dealing with human behavior, and human behavior change is not always something that us technical people are all that familiar with. It's not something we went to school. I have yet to see an IT degree or somebody come out of a certification program for changing behavior as an IT person. That's just not how these things work. But there are people in your HR department, in maybe PR or marketing, that their entire job is dealing with the human factor. Reach out to them, talk to them. Just be like, hey, you know what? This is what I'm planning on doing here. What do you think could be problems here? Where might I get some pushback? Where am I doing this wrong? And those folks can really, really help. Plus, if you can get them to understand why it's so important to not reuse passwords and things like that, they can become champions there on their own and spreading that message to other people as well. You do want to treat this like a planned technology rollout when you talk about dependencies and risk mitigation as well. Okay. So sometimes certain things have to be in place before other things happen. Now, another habit that I talk about a lot, and this is something that I dealt with a lot growing through my career. There were several times when I was in charge of physical security, and one of the things that used to drive me nuts is people would go out to have a cigarette, and they would prop the door open. So they prop the door open, and now we have an open area for bad actors to come in or whatever to happen. Okay. Now, if I tell them and I ride them hard about, you need to make sure that door is locked, you need to make sure that door is locked, that's okay. But if I haven't provided them a way to get back in through that door, like if it's a one-way door and I'm going, no, it has to latch every time, and then when you're done, you have to walk all the way around the building and come back through the front, that's probably not going to be successful. So in that case, I need to give them a way to get back in that door. And that's the kind of dependencies I'm talking about there. For example, also with passwords, it's a really big deal not to reuse passwords. If you understand how often credential stuffing happens and things like that, you understand what a big deal it is. So we're going to go to our people and we're going to say, you need to make a 15 character password. It's got a uppercase, lowercase, special characters, and you can't use it anywhere else. By the way, you can't write it down either. Now, how much success are we going to have with that? I can tell you right now, the success is going to be very limited. People are either going to come up with one phrase and then change a little tiny part of it for everything, or they're just going to, find a way around this. This is what drives people to find some sort of a shadow IT sort of idea. But if we roll out a password vault to people and we say, okay, you're going to use this password vault to generate a 15 character password that's got all these things, and it'll be really easy for you to generate this thing and recover it, like pull it out and use it in the site when you need to. We've now given them the dependency that they need to be successful. So something to think about here on that. Treat it like that. Think about the things where if you're telling somebody that they need to change this behavior, have we equipped them with the tools that they need to be able to change that behavior successfully? If not, if we're just introducing a lot of friction, we're going to have problems. So this is where you go to the leadership. You got your plan. This is awesome. This is where you go before, the Shark Tank, if you will. Prepare an executive summary for leadership that's light on the details, but heavy on the why the changes need to happen, the risk to the organization if the changes don't occur, who will be involved, and the resources you will need in the intended timeline. I do see a lot of highly technical people trip up here a little bit because we're used to getting into the weeds. We love the weeds with technology, right? We want to know all of these things. Where leadership is a little bit different. They're trying to keep the whole ship going, not just the engine, if that makes sense. There's a lot of little things going on there. They rarely want to know the absolute details. How's this going to roll out? How is this going to happen? Are you going to do it through email? Blah, 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 blah. They're not going to worry about that, okay? Focus on why. Hey, if we don't do this, we're at risk of ransomware. We're at risk of having PII stolen. This is why I want to change this behavior to mitigate that, okay? That is an important piece there, and it's something that we can definitely learn is bridging that gap to leadership. And this is a good exercise because leadership speaks different language than us. I always use the example of risk, the word risk. The word risk for an executive is different than it is generally for a cybersecurity person, because the risk for an executive is much larger. Can I pay the bills? Can I pay the vendors? Are we able to get materials? All of these things fall under risky or risks that need to be mitigated when we really focus very heavily on just the cyber side. And that's where sometimes we don't necessarily communicate correctly. So if it's possible at all, get a commitment for leadership to adopt and display the desired behavior to the rest of the organization. Again, if you're like, sir, you know, we're really trying to get people to lock their computer when they step away from it, I would love it if you would commit to doing that so we can show other people that. It'll make a big difference. That's not a heavy lift for them to do. And it can be the beginning of displaying the desired behavior for the rest of the organization. It's gonna trickle down from there. Then their subordinates, maybe the executives will ask their subordinates, you know, the next line down, hey, you know what? We're trying to make this change. This is what we're going to do every single time now. That is how things start to roll. Now, what you don't want to do is ask for an unreasonable commitment on that executive's behalf. You know, sir, I want you to do this thing that's going to take 10 minutes every time you log in, or else. That's probably not a good way to start. You want to do something that's a little bit easier so that they get a feel for how this all goes. So make it kind of easy, make it a light commitment for them when you get started. So step 4 is communicate. All right, communication is always fun. It's about communicating the why to people's behaviors we're looking to change. It's more important than it may initially seem because we're often asking them to take additional steps to accomplish the same thing they have in the past. Okay, for example, multi-factor authentication. I am a huge fan and proponent of MFA. But when you look at MFA, one of the things you need to think about is for 10 years, these employees have been coming in, they sit down, they do their username, their password, and they start work. Okay. Now we're asking them to do their username and password, pull out their phone, open an app, wait for that silly timer to reset because it never comes through with enough time, right? And frankly, let's be honest, the countdown timers on things like the authenticator apps can add a lot of anxiety. Let's be honest about that. But we're asking them to do all of these things that they've never had to do in the past to accomplish the same goal, which is simply to start work. So think about that when we're doing this, okay? This is why it's so important for them to understand, wow, you know what? Without MFA, it can be much easier for attackers to get into the system. They could take everybody's personal information. They could, you know, have a data breach with all of the employees. Like this could be a nightmare for all of us. That's why we're going to do this extra step. It's a whole lot easier to be able to swallow that pill than it is to just go, no, you're going to do this now. You see what I mean? We're introducing friction. We have to be careful how much friction, but if people understand why, it makes a big difference. Again, illustrate how the behavior is personally relevant to them. And it's a great place to engage with your champions within the organization to help communicate at a peer level. In other words, people may tell you, no, it's fine. And then they go back to their department or their desk and they're like, Bob, this is stupid, right? Well, if Bob is one of your champions, they could even kind of go, you know what? I understand. Yeah, I get it. But it's not a bad idea because, right? This can be very helpful with the champions within the organization. Work with the other departments to reinforce the messaging in their respective communications. In other words, when another team communicates with their team, maybe they mention that too in there. Hey, everybody, this is the status on this, this, and this. And by the way, we're still really driving on making sure that everybody's using the MFA and not having a problem. So that right there can be very helpful too, is to get that coming from other areas. So it's not just you screaming into the storm. Step 5 is to execute the plan. Okay. Your plan should have a clear goal and a well-defined picture of what success looks like. I cannot tell you the number of times I've seen people start a plan without ever knowing what success actually looks like. In other words, hey, did this work well? I'm not really sure. Well, what did you expect it to do? Well, I didn't really think about that. So you can't really say it's successful or not successful. Maybe you made a little bit of progress in something, but not all of it. So that's important to understand what success looks like. Deadlines and times to communicate and implement each part of the plan should already be thought out. In other words, if I need to roll out, password vaults to everybody, that should be done by this date before I make everybody start using unique passwords. Okay. Some flexibility is to be expected. It's just like anything else. There may be exceptions. Okay. Whenever I wrote a policy, one of the things that I always tried to do was allow an exception to that policy through some way that made sense. In other words, you may have to get approval from leadership or something, but inevitably, we're not going to think about all the things that need to happen as we're building this. And so we're going to have to do exceptions. Just understand that. Be flexible. Sometimes we may have to step back and go, oh, wow, I didn't realize that doing this in this group was going to impact this down the line. Okay. Just be willing and easy to make changes and ready to make changes if needed. You do want to measure progress. And this, again, great time to perform another security culture survey, so you have a baseline to compare the improvements to. In other words, where are we now? As you start to execute that plan is when you want to know, where are we right now? That way you can see if it changes further down. Be ready for that pushback. Okay. Don't take it personally. Again, people can be frustrated. This can be very daunting for people when we're trying to change behaviors that they've been doing for the last 10, 15, 20 years. Keep an eye open for things that negatively impact the workforce and be ready to adjust if needed. Hey, this thing's causing us not to produce product because, okay, let's step back, let's put a hold on this, and let's adjust. So step 6 is measuring the results. So remember, this is going to last 30, 60 days, maybe even longer, maybe even 3 months, 6 months, depending on what you're trying to change and the significance of the change, like where you are today and where you want to be for success. So when it's fully executed, perform another one of those culture surveys to see, okay, did it move the things I want to do? This is where you may decide you need more progress. This may also be where you say, you know what, we have improved by 80% the people that are using MFA. The others are by exception because it breaks things or whatever. That is acceptable at this point. So then what you do is you replace what it is you're trying to change with something else. Okay. You also want to look at this to see what was successful and what might not have been. Document these results in a report that can be shared with leadership. But again, executive summary style. Hey, we did this for 90 days. The goal was to do this. We measured it like this, and we believe the improvement can be seen through this measurement here. That reduces our risk in this area. Okay, again, light on the details, heavy on the why and what it's done to help you. Again, start small. It's fine. That's fine. You go to leadership and you show that this is actually making a change. That's going to help the next time around when you go, boss, I need you to do this thing that's a little bit tougher. Okay. That's going to help. Now, note where the behavior changes in one dimension. Remember those dimensions we talked about impact others, so you can understand that relationship for future planning. In other words, if one dimension moves, if dimension 1 is something that you focused on and you notice that dimension 4 moves a little bit, because of that, you may realize, oh, hey, okay, these are related in a way. And so I can expect to see this. I hope that makes sense to everybody. And then last but not least, step 7. So once you've met the timeline allotted for the plan or have met the goals outlined in the plan, you can review your threats and determine if you should continue to focus on the same goals or work towards others in the next cycle. Again, this is where you go, this was acceptable. Now I'm going to back off of this. Now, that doesn't mean you just totally stop. It means your focus is not on that. You may still leave up a poster or something here and there in the office, but it's one poster instead of 5, 6, 7, 10, right? You may still mention it at some of the meetings, but it may be every 6 months or during Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Then you mention it, then you talk about it, but it's not the focus. So then you move in your next behavior you want to change and you focus on that. Always review what worked well and what did not. This can be a painful thing sometimes. When we look at things and we go, oh, that was an utter failure. Well, that's fine. As long as we look at why it was a failure and try to adjust, that's not that big a deal. You're going to have things that don't work well, and you're going to have things that do work well. So look at those things. And then when you do your next cycle, try to adjust what you need to so that more things work well. The other thing you can do now at this point is reach out to those people you identified as advocates. Get their feedback and suggestions. Hey, y'all, we finished this. We're pretty happy with where we ended up. I want to know, what was the process like for you? What did you hear from the people? Was there a lot of grumbling? Was it a big problem for people? Or were they more accepting of it? Is there something that happened? Was there a communication that made them feel better about it? Those are the questions you're going to ask right here so that you can continue to do that next time around. If there's a communication that works better than like a newsletter or something like that, then you know where to focus your efforts on. Continue reinforcing those behaviors, even if you move to the new behavior focus. Like I said, it may be, it may be something that doesn't happen every day or every meeting now. It may happen every, 6 months or 3 months or something like that. You go, hey, just want to remind everybody, we need those passwords. Use your vault. It's important. That's not necessarily the behavior is kind of on autopilot at that point because the habits have been made. Now, it's important to understand that habits are something that we do all the time. Okay, it's something that we don't necessarily even think of. It is hard to change habits. But once we've changed that habit and we have something else going on, that good behavior is now the habit, and it's hard to change that good behavior. So you don't need to work on it nearly as much. So I hope you understand here. We're going to go through a little summary here, and I really hope this helped you appreciate where you can start and what you can do in a step-by-step way for culture in your organization. I'll say this, none of this is in stone. You may need to adjust how you do things within your organization because we're dealing with humans. We're dealing with human behavior. It may be different within your organization, but I firmly believe that these 7 steps that we have here are a great starting point for most organizations to at least get moving on this. We're going to learn as we go in some of this, and every organization is going to be different. You're going to find that, and that's okay. But these 7 basic steps will really help you. So in summary, improving security culture may seem complex. However, understanding that the change happens over time and is the result of positive behavior changes and habit formations can simplify the task. In other words, again, you're making habits. Understanding that it's gonna take a while. We'll take a lot of the stress off this. If you go into it and you go, by next week, everybody's gonna do this, you are probably setting yourself up for some unhappiness. But if you go in and you go, okay, this is what I'm expecting. I'm expecting some pushback. I'm expecting people to not understand. I'm expecting people to complain a little bit. But I also expect that eventually they'll see what's going on and how it helps them out. That's a much better way to go into it. Be very deliberate in your actions and don't try to change too much too quickly. Focus on those couple of things, those couple of behaviors that you're doing that you want to change. Focus on those. Don't get distracted and throw out some other ones in the middle of all this. That's just going to muddy the water and confuse things. Be deliberate. Don't try to change it too much. And communication can make a big difference in the swiftness and degree to which the behaviors change, especially if the communications help people understand why they should care about security. Let's be honest, there is still a group of people out there that goes, my role is this, and I shouldn't have to care about security at all. That's all on the company. Unfortunately, and that may have been true 20, 30 years ago, but the world has changed, and our jobs, all of them, now have a digital portion to them. In the days of typewriters, security was a whole lot different than the days when we're dealing with email and we're sending stuff out like that. Okay. Part of our jobs just in life is to care about some of this security. So we need to say that gently, but we need to help people understand why they should care. Remember, the blue car has your name spray painted down the side of it. Your information, your PII, social security number, tax ID number, whatever it is at risk along with everybody else in the organization if we're not careful. That starts bringing the message home just a little bit to them. And then they may care a little bit more. Keep reminding them of that. So that's the end of the summary here. I hope you've learned something here. Feel free to reach out to me with email or on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to talk about this. Let me know if you have any questions or comments, or if there's some things that maybe you didn't understand through this. I'm always, always, always happy to do that. Don't forget to download those resources. And thank you so much for being here today. Have a great day.
All right. Well, wow, that was a lot of great insight and a lot of things that, at least we just don't talk about here, but those points are so important for achieving strong security. So I really want to thank Eric for putting together that top-notch presentation. And some of you did type in questions, and we'll pass those along to Eric and the Know Before team. And remember, like Eric just mentioned, you can reach out to him yourself at Erich K, that's Eric, ERICH, at knowbefore.com. And that's KNOWBE4.com. Or you can reach him on Twitter /X at Erich Kron, or Erich Kron, but it's ERICHKRON if you want to reach him there. Okay. Well, before we wrap up, we do have one more piece of business, and that is the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $250 gift card is Jesse Pock from California. So congratulations to Jesse Pock. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Know Before for making this event possible, and Eric again for a great presentation. And thanks as always for attending. I see some of the comments coming in here from Thomas and Paul just about what a great presentation it's been. Yeah, thanks for your feedback. Couldn't agree more. So that's going to conclude today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.